All right, welcome. SLP215, Module 12. Okay, aphasia. Talked about aphasia last week. I don't know why I keep wanting to minimize, sorry. Let's screen share, 1 second. Okay. Intervention. So when we talk about intervention and therapy for aphasia, so here we go again where there's kind of characteristics that are kind of consistent. No two people with aphasia are exactly alike. So that's pretty clear with all of our disorders. So just some things to remember. So we really want to always let somebody know the purpose of the activity and why we're doing it, because really the bulk of our clientele who have aphasia are adults. So obviously that's kind of a little bit different approach than we have with our young children. So kind of really what we're looking for is more simplistic things, functional. And when I say functional, so someone else, I had given feedback from somebody and I said, that is very functional, whatever it was. So they asked me to kind of define functional, and I do use it quite a bit, and maybe I'm not really clear on what I mean by that. So functional meaning, is this useful to their everyday life? So for example, calculus wasn't really functional for me at being a speech language pathologist. Statistics were very functional for me to understand when I'm doing diagnostics and understanding standardization and how do we diagnose a disability. So statistics were very critical and very useful for me to understand and comprehend for my career. So looking at other skills needed for other careers, is it functional for them? So looking at, let's say, therapy. So coming up with a rhyming word. Here's per example, rhyming words. When we're doing it through a developmental lens, this is good phonemic awareness, recognizing patterns in words, kind of add, what I would say, accessing kind of that rhyming, kind of maybe that more music area of our brain a little bit when we're thinking of rhyming words, word families, that kind of thing, versus why would we do it with an adult? What's our purpose of accomplishing that skill? They already know how to rhyme, or they need some of that kind of that phonemic practice, or hearing how words are alike, kind of working on some of those auditory skills. So it depends. What's the purpose of rhyming? What you might do with an adult versus a child are very different purposes for it. So categories. So categories are one of those things I talk a lot about. We see it a lot when we do kind of that neuro rehab, and I use it a lot with our developmental models. So with our kids, why is that important? What's the function of doing categories? And explaining to somebody it's functional because it works on language organization. So a lot of times, sometimes with adults, they require more explanation of doing what you're doing. And looking at functional, is working on that skill going to help them pose a sentence or increase their access to words? Are we trying to increase their word recall? Are we trying to help them organize their language better? So looking at the purpose and the function, and really functional is a skill we're working on, can they apply it in other avenues? So why is that skill important and how does it apply to their daily lives? So really looking on, when I say functional, is the purpose and the skill we're practicing, is it functional for them and what they need in their lives? Like I said, what's functional for one person might not be functional for another. So I'm trying to think of a career that needed calculus. Okay, maybe an actuary. Okay, they need calculus. Me as speech pathologist, I don't. Or looking at kind of physics. So physics. And I remember having to take it in college and I'm thinking, why do I need physics? Well, once I took it, I understood more. It's about understanding sound and kind of those dynamics, speech, sound, physics. Definitely was applicable to me once I got through my master's degree of why I had to take physics of sound in my undergrad. But again, that might not be relevant for another career. So just looking at functionality of things is super important. And sequential modification. So a lot of times too with our aphasia clients is looking at different environments and different contexts. So a lot of times we have to think about their professional realm. So what might be important and functional at home might not be as relevant or functional in a workplace setting. So definitely looking for those different contexts in which adults live and work is super important. And a lot of times too, there's a lot of there's more group therapy and group supports in place for our adults who do have aphasia, and really kind of looking at communicative competence. So can we work on skills for them to communicate in any context? So when we're providing intervention, really thinking about all the different contexts are important. Another things too is how will they communicate in the future? If they aren't going to be as verbal as they would like, or as return to being verbal as they were before. So let's think about myself. I have some aphasia and I have some severe, I'm not fluent, I'm have difficulty with word finding. Me returning as a speech therapist might be kind of a stretch. So looking at ability to work on sounds, sound production, or language skills with a variety of clientele, or fluency, that kind of thing. So a lot of times, how do we work on it in therapy? We model it. So, you know, that might not be functional for me. What's my prognosis when after treatment? Where am I going to be at? Could I return to work? Is that going to even be possible? That kind of thing. So definitely thinking about that whole person. And many, many, many times it's about returning to their daily living and their career. Yeah, severe global. Ooh, I do this all the time. Hold on. I don't know what happened because I got ahead of myself last time too. I jumped the gun a little bit. So I apologize for if you watched the lecture, you kind of got a head start on stuff. So comprehension, let's look at that. So auditory comprehension. So we kind of use that bottom up, top down model. And truly somebody asked me, is one better than the other? I think what we're looking for sometimes, and this is where you go to your supervisor. Are we starting small and getting big? Or are we just starting big and maybe we need to break it down small? And sometimes it goes both ways when you're doing treatment. So really, sometimes you start with one and that doesn't work, so you adjust. I think a lot of us do that. And even now, just auditory comprehension in general, I think can be a challenge for a variety of disorders, not just aphasia. So this is where we look at that multi-sensory component, because definitely with aphasia, so auditory, asking just basic yes, no questions. So sometimes what happens too that we see, their body might be shaking yes, but they say no. So a lot of times we're working on what's the best mode to communicate. So is it easier for them to verbally do it, or is a nonverbal way to answer yes, no questions easier for them? Are they able to follow a direction? Do they need other types of prompts and support, especially from an auditory component? And if auditory comprehension is really low, how much visual support do they need? Is that helpful? So sometimes there's a variety of things that we just have to tease out within intervention, and this is where your data comes in. So you start top-down model, you're taking data and you're realizing, ooh, no, I got to break it down. We got to start small. I can't, they're not progressing with this, or they're not responding to that. So then you start, okay, let's go bottom up. Let's start at the basic and let's build. So a lot of times I think I tend to be more bottom up person. I think I systematically can kind of think that way, but I jump around. Sometimes or I think they have more comprehension. So I think, okay, we can go start at the top and then work our way down. Or sometimes, this is too taxing. Anytime I feel like things are challenging, more on the challenging end, I like bottom up model. But that's just me and my style. And you'll work with supervisors with different style. And this is where kind of when we're looking at comprehension, what are the cues that they need? Do they need the phonemic cue? So a lot of times I see people with aphasia, they might need the cue. It starts with the k sound, or it starts with the or the gestures. So sometimes just a gesture helps them recall that word, or it has to be written down. So they a lot of times have very poor auditory comprehension, so they need to be able to read it. And then Lord help them if they have challenges with reading. But this is where, when we talk about multisensory intervention, this is where the tactile cue, the written cue, the picture visual cue, the phonemic cue, all of these cues and prompts are really helpful to really tease out what works best to help them access this information. And this is where we can help them kind of implement this within their environment and along with their families, or maybe possible, job, returning to their job. So expressive language treatment, we kind of work on those content words. Can we enhance it with other nonverbal cues? Do we have the subject, verb, object? So a lot of times we kind of do that telegraphic. It's, go, go sit there, or, put in back. So we're really trying to keep the function. So it's really kind of the subject and the verb and maybe the object, or the function of what they need to do. Try to keep our complexity small and then increase in complexity. A lot of times they're not at the conversational level. We might work on kind of that storytelling and retelling of information, kind of those simple steps. So I did a lot of this where we kind of took a picture, like, again, I like photo albums, and they can kind of tell me. So their family member, their caregiver might kind of fill me in on some of the pictures, and then we go through that and really work on increasing the length and complexity of the same story. So a lot of times you have to use the same subject matter with aphasia to kind of build on it. Because once you give them a new stimulus, sometimes, a lot of times it's starting from scratch again. So the reason why sometimes you stick with the same stimulus for a while is we start to access and increase the complexity, and you do it kind of over and over again, and then they can start to generalize to the next thing. That's the other key piece too. I don't know if it's really emphasized enough, is we really want to work on generalization. So if they're doing it in one setting with one component, can they do it in another setting? So again, reading can be all over the place. How much are they understanding when they read? Are they able to identify letters and words? So sometimes it can be so challenging, they're not identifying letters and words. So written directions might not be functional for them at the moment. So those are things that when you work with patients with aphasia, anomia, a lot of times have a lot of problems coming up with the word. So I usually have anomia on, on office hours. So coming up with the word, and that's when sometimes these rhyming tasks, synonyms, opposites, kind of help with just getting that word retrieval going. And a lot of times we explain to our clients, we're doing this to practice accessing words, getting it easier for you to come up with the word when you think about it. So definitely Format. So looking at the format of therapy, please always try, doesn't matter the age of your client, kind of build that personal rapport. So a couple of people I know on one of the projects wrote, I asked my client how they're doing, tell me something fun that happened over the weekend. So little questions like that where you can just have kind of that personal interaction is super helpful for all clients, young and old. Please try to be personable. Of course, maintain appropriate personal boundaries, but definitely be personable with your clients. They tend to make more progress if they feel like you like them, if you seem to enjoy their company, especially with adults. It's super critical, even more so maybe than with our child population. And the other part that we really also kind of try to help our adult clients. So let's say they're really struggling with a certain component of communication. Can we teach them a compensatory skill? So this is where sometimes verbal on the phone isn't going to be a good strategy for them. They need to maybe be able to call, ask for an email where they can email their question, their concern, or the person they need to talk to. Are they available by email? Can I email them my question or my concern? So a lot of times looking at how do we compensate, for their difficulties with communication, and then are they able to compensate across different environments? So when they're at work versus at home in their personal life, or now with like online scheduling, a lot of times too, just, hey, that's easier than me calling and asking for an appointment and writing it down. If I have it in a scheduler, they confirm, it's easier for me to show up and know I have my dentist appointment, I have my doctor's appointment, I have my hair appointment, whatever it is. So how are we helping them compensate and make things easier for them within their daily life? And like I said, the other part is be a good listener. So a lot of times looking at the support system that they have, what do they report? How are they supporting the client? How are they supporting their communication environment? All of those things are critical within treating aphasia, because like I said, majority of these clients were average functioning, typical adults, and now all of a sudden things have happened. So definitely some adjustment there for them. And really kind of also maybe they might need a little bit more critique. When I say that, you might point out an error and how to change the error, but it has to be done respectfully too. So definitely there's some more finesse when treating adults, but again, depending on your style or how you are as a person, sometimes I find treating adults much easier. They're in many ways and can be really rewarding, especially with our clients with aphasia, because they make so much progress so quickly. So looking at what I call neuro rehab, really fun. They learn a lot about themselves and their own brain and how their mind works, and can kind of sometimes explicitly share that with you to help you come up with strategies to help support them better. So I do like treating adults. It's a much different dynamic and environment than with young children. And the other part is it's usually there's kind of an end time frame. It's X amount of weeks we're going to work on this. There are some other things too, looking at apraxia. Sometimes they have body apraxia, so it's not just apraxia of speech. It's their limbs and things aren't quite coordinated and working together. A lot of times they're getting other therapies. So a lot of times they're getting physical therapy as well as occupational therapy. So kind of that integrative, hardcore neuro rehab stuff I really like. Dysarthrias. So quick reminder, we won't go into it too much, but a lot of times someone who's has aphasia, suffered some kind of injury that's caused aphasia, a lot of times can also have dysarthria. I know you guys talk about it in 214. Nobody's going to really call me on all these different what's taught in which class. But definitely sometimes looking at, they have dysarthria, okay, what's the prognosis on some improvement? And then how are we going to support and supplement their communication? So sometimes there's a portion of treating to the dysarthria, and then at some point, sometimes we kind of adjust and we look more at that augmentative alternative communication, as well as what level are they capable of? Can they, do we need to dial it back down to picture-based stuff, or can they write, can they choose letters, can they choose words rather easily, or they can talk in very short, instances, but for something maybe longer, or they want to be sure their communication is understood. Maybe using an augmentative communication is more helpful for them. And a lot of times too, working with your supervisor, and that's what's fun about kind of aphasia intervention, is there's a lot of change, there's a lot of improvements or adjustments that have to be made quickly. So this is what's great when you talk to your supervisor, you keep good data on what's changing, what was hard, what was easy, or what's not consistent. Sometimes they walk in, they don't have any problems thinking about the words, and then other days it's really a struggle. So kind of even keeping data on those differences is really helpful to give feedback to your supervisor to help target, what do we need to do in therapy? Okay, what's not consistent? What are some skills we need to continually work on for them? And that's what's hard too. So sometimes, but once you start treating disorders, you'll get better at knowing, what do I need to report to my supervisor, or what do I need to pay attention to? Lots of frequent feedback and communication with your supervisor on your patients with aphasia just makes you a better therapist, as well as give your supervisor has opportunity to give you better feedback and guidance. There's some good information on the ASHA. This is the national health. So this is Europe, but what we're looking for is really help you communicate to the best of your ability. So increase your activity and participation. That's what we really want to do. I have the hiccups now, so sorry. And find alternate ways of communicating. So a lot of times therapy is going to be a mesh of kind of 3 different goals. And that's where definitely your supervisor will help and support you. So you're like, well, this really isn't improving. Okay, so we need to push more in this area. Or, hey, this has really come along. They're finding their words, they're able to kind of compose 3 and 4 word phrases. All right, really, let's increase their language complexity, whatever it is. And really what we see too with aphasia, especially aphasia caused by like stroke or some kind of injury, the most rapid changes occur early on, right away after recovery. But we do see improvements long time, year, 2 years later, we'll still see improvements. So that's what makes the brain really exciting. Our brain has a capacity to improve and change things. So especially with aphasia, if they've had, they were typical, your average person up until that point, because lots of pathways have opened for them. And so this is just some speech language therapy techniques. Kind of fun to just kind of look at that, review some of those things. And like I said, there's a lot of computer-based apps, and there's some good evidence to support using them, but I would never solely use apps as far as therapy goes, especially with our clients with aphasia. So kind of looking at communicating with a person with aphasia. So the other part too that we do support is supporting their support system, their family. What are some strategies we need to help them remember to use to help them communicate with their loved one? Definitely some helpful hints and things to do when we're working on setting up a successful environment for them. So those are also kind of other extraneous components to intervention, is supporting the client, supporting the families that are supporting them, giving them tips and tricks on how to get optimal communication, and definitely looking at what's working, what's not working. So we know there's certain things that work really well that's evidence-based, but a lot of times if it's not working for your particular client, speak up, say, you know what, I know this is usually really helpful. This isn't really helpful for this person. And that's what your supervisor needs to know. So we're gonna go with basics that we know, but as you work with somebody, you'll get to know them better about what works and what doesn't. Definitely, there's a range of challenges for our clients with aphasia as well as obstacles, and it can be very overwhelming sometimes. So we also have to definitely remember and regard their feelings about things or things that they're resistant to. We have to be respectful of their thoughts and feelings. And working with somebody with aphasia, you might need some support from your supervisor on how to handle things, or they don't want to work on any kind of supplementary or augmentative communication because they want to talk. But realistically, we know maybe outcome isn't, or the prognosis isn't good for fully to be at their optimal where they were at before. So what's reasonable? So some of those things I think can be difficult because again, no two people are alike. So those are kind of things that your supervisor might need to know and might need to give you some more input or support on how to better service your clients. So think about that. There's aphasia.org has some good therapy guides. So when we're looking at intervention, there's some specific examples of specific therapy. You kind of look at that. So this is one I've been trying to learn more about. I had an intern that was really good at this. It was melodic intonation therapy. I am, like I said, not musical at all, but definitely there's some good support and research on this. So it makes sense to me reading about it. Yeah, supported conversation, pace therapy. Definitely there's some, what I would call more prescriptive therapy programs that people utilize when dealing with clients with aphasia. But I would say a lot of it is what can we do to support them and make them as optimal communication, not meaning always optimal speakers. So again, sometimes we have to remember our version of communication, our definition of communication is different from maybe somebody else's. So those are kind of things you have to reinforce and support somebody as they're going through rehab, and especially if their verbal speech isn't coming out fluent, they're having more struggles, more of those language-based, non-fluent. So there's some aphasia therapy ideas. I had a discussion board for that. And then the treatment, I kind of talked about it last week, so I apologize if people are getting this twice. Yeah, so aphasia therapy ideas, an aphasia session plan. It's real quick. There is a assessment. So again, pick 2 things you would use in therapy. Give it, it's real basic. I'm not looking for anything extravagant. And how are you going to introduce it to your client? And how are you going to make it easier? So that's kind of that bottom up or top down model. So a lot of times too, you kind of try to start somewhere in the middle. How am I going to take it up? Increase the complexity, increase the difficulty, and then how am I going to break it down into smaller parts? Okay, so where I started, this isn't working, I need to break it down. So again, somebody asked, what if I'm wrong? I have to tell you guys, as many years as I've been doing therapy, especially when you start with a new client or even a client you've had for a long time, sometimes you started an activity and you're like, wow, that was way too easy. Like I need to bump it up. Or you start somewhere, you think, oh, this is doable. They can do this without, a whole lot of difficulty, and they struggle, and you've got to like really break it down. So we have all done that, and that's what makes you a competent therapist. Can I increase the complexity? Can I make it easier? Because a lot of times, sometimes you start somewhere and that just wasn't the place to start. So all of us has done that. Doesn't matter how many years or how much experience we have. We clearly picked something. In fact, I had a disaster go and I had my intern and I was like, wow, okay, they can't do this. All right, this didn't work either. Okay, let me break it down some more. And I had to basically, we started at, basic vocab, and I was trying to do an activity where we work on verb tense, and boy, we had to break it down all the way down to basic vocab. And I was talking to her and I'm like, it doesn't matter. And I've had this group for 2 years. Things sometimes we think they can do, they can't, or there's things we think might be a little bit of a challenge and they breeze through it. So that's kind of that finesse of therapy, and really always explaining, especially with our clients with aphasia, why we're working on the skill. What's the purpose of the task? So look at that. Hopefully it's not too difficult. And that's really it. And a lot of times too, we sometimes have a optimistic prognosis, or sometimes we have something that we maybe don't give a good prognosis, but that person makes, great gains in recovery, or people we expect to make great gains don't. So sometimes prognosis with aphasia is unknown, because again, we're making our best guess, but we can be wrong too. So just know that also. Some of our gut prognosis can be off. And that's where you as a therapist, if you feel like, hey, this person's improving, they need more therapy, that's where you go to your supervisor and advocate. Hey, they're benefiting. There's a great improvement. Here's my data to show they can continue to benefit, especially when we're looking at Medicare, Medicaid, some of those insurance or payment options. They give you X amount, and then your supervisor's got to write an eval or letter and justify why they need more. So those are some other components that kind of come into play also with that disorder in this population. So stop the share. But I do have to say, oh, I'll check in that. The therapy ideas, I think I just have the ones that I have listed. Sites. Aren't they listed on the, I'll check and make sure. There were some things I had to take off last semester because they weren't working. So I might have to reword that a little bit. They're usually when I refer to sites, because we're talking about what's in the read and review. I did have to take a couple off that were no longer active. So if I had 6 and there's not 6, I did have to think of take 2 or 3 off. There might only be 2. And then there's some in the workbook too. But that's the read and review, right? I think you're talking about the read and review, Leslie. So, alrighty, that's really it. But I'll reword that because you're right. There's not 6 sites. I think there's only 2 or 3. And then I appreciate you guys joining me. Again, if we have any veterans, thank you for your service, and enjoy Veterans Day tomorrow for those of you who possibly don't have to work or have the day off to maybe get caught up. um, and that'd be all tonight. I appreciate you guys joining me. Have a good week. I am trying to get caught up. I think this class is a little bit behind, so I will get caught up with grading too.